Muted.
Short people, I tell you. Welcome, everyone. I'm Chad Wers. I'm the executive sponsor for our IT Infrastructure Services Program, and welcome you here today to discuss our IT sourcing program and the security services in particular. Today, we're going to talk about what we're planning for an RFP that we're releasing specifically on security services. And one thing is we recognize that it's very expensive for companies to come pursue this type of business. What we're intending to do is to share information so companies can make the good decisions on what they are and are not going to pursue. And we should have some information today to help you with that. So today we're going to have Perry Pasquale, who's our Director of Sourcing Strategy, and Tim Rickman from Integra Supply lead us through, and I believe Mike Watson's going to make a special guest appearance also, who's the CISO for Virginia in today's session. So with that, I'll turn over to Perry.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for coming to the Commonwealth Enterprise Solutions Center here in Chester to participate in person. And for those joining on the line, I think David, our webinar operator, just let me know we crossed about 40 different folks. I think in total we have about 50 different suppliers and 150 participants registered. So thank you for carving out time this afternoon to try to share some information, as Chad mentioned, about our services sourcing strategy. Apologize, I recognize that the subtitle there says potential suppliers. In fact, some of you are already suppliers, so thank you for joining as well. And I do look forward to anyone else who's going to become shortly proposing and hopefully joining the fold going forward. The content is very similar to what I presented back on July 21st, so for those of you who endured that, welcome back. So let me press on. Once again, I give you a brief program overview. What are we doing here? And last year, we engaged Integra Supply, a third-party advisory services consulting firm, represented today by Tim Rickman, to help us understand what we could do in light of the impending term of our current contract for infrastructure services, the CIA with Northrop Grumman. That is projected to have its natural term in June of 2019. And so last year we took some time to understand what might we do in this second generation of IT outsourcing. And so to that end, you see up here, repeated again, a summary recommendation from Integris, which we took under consideration in the Commonwealth, VITA and the CIO working in concert with various stakeholders, the administration, and the legislature, to make sure that this was something we were comfortable taking on and to pursue this activity working more closely with the supplier market as well as our other stakeholders, our end user community, to achieve a better outcome. One of those things is a better balance between enterprise and agency goals. We've shared this with you before. Some of the things we believe we've largely achieved in our first outsourcing exercise over on the enterprise side, achieving some level of standardization, more enhanced and uniform security posture, some flexibility to evolve, higher degrees of control and management and cost competitiveness. But we want to extend on those while incorporating things that are important to our individual agencies and end users, and that is to enhance service delivery quality, a little bit of transparency into what they're paying for and what they're receiving, how it operates, how they can participate when it's appropriate for them to participate, give them choices. So there is a way to balance standards and provide choice, so we want to make sure that we incorporate that going forward. So those are some of the things that we're trying to achieve from a business model going forward. At the end of the day, we're moving away from a monolithic program, single prime, Northrop Grumman in our incumbent circumstance, using a number of you all as subcontracted or key subcontractors, but bring all those various parts forward where it makes sense. So we are moving into a multi-supplier platform which features a multi-sourcing service integrator. We'll discuss that a little bit more. We want to enhance the end user connection and interaction to this model. We want to leverage governance efficiencies, make sure there's consistency in both contract and service level. And we want to look for an opportunity. The Commonwealth wants the ability to plug and play, to incorporate others, to have multiples where it's reasonable. And then when it's appropriate, to usher those to move on to other things. This also requires our service platform and our participants to have shared service levels. One or many of you will have an impact on how a service is performing from the end user's perspective. So we want to make sure that we articulate that you all understand it if you're in the fold, and that we can all play well together. Ultimately deliver services to our customers. It also entails this thing called operating level agreements. You agree to work with each other, and there are handoffs and receipts and time frames and responsibilities and activities and levels of quality associated with those inputs and outputs. So we want to make sure that those things happen. And actually we're going to establish that prior to award. It's not our intention to work on it after the award. It's part of the award process and negotiation process. So that is some of the activity that you all need to contemplate as you begin to determine whether you want to participate in the upcoming RFPs. And obviously, I don't need to repeat it again. We all come to the natural term of our contracts, and there will be an opportunity to recompete, possibly at different terms. But on a long-term play, we want to make sure that our services reflect the technological advances, the innovations, and the improvements in services that our end users want to appreciate as time goes on. So overall, the big summary points there, the new service delivery model, multi-service, multi-supplier, increased transparency into the activities. There's always question among end users and consumers of services. How does this get done? Is it getting done well? So we want some transparency into that. We want to allow the addition of new suppliers and new technologies. Oftentimes, new solutions, mechanisms, innovations don't come from our incumbents, and we want to be able to make sure that we can incorporate new service providers. We also want to make sure that we enhance VITA and the Commonwealth and oversee this multi-supplier platform. We think it will result in a dynamic platform. It will be the common jargon, if you will be ITIL based. That is the common language for infrastructure services, and we want to extend on that. Even the Commonwealth in and of itself, VITA and its customers, will be using that same language since we participate in that platform as well. I've already spoken to OLAs, but we're also going to make the invitation that our client organizations participate. What is VITA's role and responsibility relative to the services in this platform? What are our customers' roles and responsibilities? So we want to make that as transparent and apparent to you all as possible. And then ultimately provide a seamless integration. We don't want this to be a clunky piece of machinery that customers have to know every single moving part. We want transparency, but we want it to work because of the integration points we'll build together. Just a quick pictorial to remind you all, if you aren't steeped in ITIL main, the ITIL main processes, the V3 construct itself, probably a good thing to go invest in that and get up to snuff on that. But we will be talking largely around these 5 main buckets of main processes and all the sub-processes within. I want to remind you all that beyond the provision or delivery of infrastructure services to our mandatory and all public bodies, for that matter, we have other missions, governance of Commonwealth IT infrastructure and projects, or rather IT projects and investments, operation of the infrastructure itself, governance of investments and projects, as well as procurement activities. And then today, just roundabout figures, the scope of the CIA contract covers the entire breadth of the Commonwealth, over 2,000 different sites. You can read up there the different points of infrastructure services that we have, and I think we currently count our mandatory customers to be about 63 different executive branch agencies. So I mentioned that the difference this time is that we're going to work in concert with the supplier community. Instead of entertaining PPEAs, or at least we haven't been approached with a PPEA like we were about 11 or 12 years ago, we're going to market through requests for proposals, competitive solicitation. We have already, if you've been keeping an eye on us, in Wave 1, made an award in messaging. That was to Tempest Nova, which specializes in Google products. So the executive branch agencies will be moving from Microsoft-based email and messaging services to Google services. And that has moved from award into transition planning and execution. The second major competitive procurement in Wave 1 is IBM Mainframe. That is in process. Award is projected in the next couple, 3 weeks. So that will proceed with our wave approach relative to the entire breadth of the CIA. Wave 2 then, which is our current focus, notwithstanding IBM Mainframe, are competitive procurements for the multi-sourcing integrator, the server storage service areas, and managed security services. Spoke previously to the first two. I'll review those quickly in the next couple of slides. Managed security wanted to provide some amplifying information. Also want to make sure that you are aware of the certain way that we're building this first iteration of the Multisupplier platform, and I'm going to restate those, what we're calling preclusions, if you will. And then Wave 3, which is not yet planned, but we'll begin planning sometime this time next year, will be the balance of the contract with Northrop Grumman end user computing, both data and voice network. Wave 2 is still scheduled for late September. I think we previously communicated to you an August timeframe, obviously at the end of August, and we have not published the RFPs. I think the EVE announcements have reflected that updated timeframe, so we're still marching towards a late September publish of the RFPs. As always, we're seeking suppliers with solutions that meet our requirements. And so our exercise to date in the RFP, the Wave 2 RFPs, are to articulate what we want or what we need. Where we have hard and fast specifications, we will try to give that to you, but the intent is not to dictate how you solve it. We want you to account for certain things, but we want you to come to us with the best possible solution, most competitive, value for money. And then as part of the procurement process itself, we'll make sure that we incorporate an opportunity to seek clarification, because we recognize words and paper are probably the most blunt way, inaccurate way to describe what you want to deliver, but we've got to start from somewhere. Pictorially, this represents where we are with our waves. I mentioned Wave 1 is messaging and mainframe, far upper left, proceeding into contract awards and transition plan execution. Wave 2 there is in the middle, and per the calendar year and calendar quarters there, you see we're trying to execute against this original blueprint. And one of the things that did change, I think I communicated that before, was managed security was not originally envisioned to be in Wave 2, but we have pulled it forward given the breadth of exposure associated with the data center services. And then that leaves a balance of end user and networks that you see in the bottom right-hand corner. So let me talk a little bit about the scope of the procurement, and I'm going to give you a little bit of a reminder about what it is we think we're building. And from the diagram that you saw earlier, there was the MSI, and then from the MSI are these various tower service suppliers. A little bit detail on the MSI once again. We believe that the multi-sourcing services integrator will give us an opportunity to enhance our Commonwealth's ability to oversee and coordinate service providers. One of the primary things that they will do is make sure that based on our policies and our architectural and service standards, that all the players in the service platform comply through process and tools, process compliance checks. We adhere to service levels. They help bring together all the service level management components so that we can report on service levels, whether they're shared or unique. They provide service integration functions and help with planning among various tower service providers and components. They also assist in service delivery, bottom left-hand corner. They will actually have the service desk. We think that's essentially the central nervous system that helps coordinate the ticketing, event monitoring, change, problem, incident. All the processes that rely on automation and coordination are largely accomplished through service desk tool sets. We know that the MSI market or service providing market typically also includes opportunities for invoice and chargeback. You can imagine we're going to have multiple suppliers providing their invoices. We need to process and validate those, make sure that we pay you all timely according to contract terms, but also help facilitate the rendering of those invoices into chargebacks to our end user community. So we'll be looking for that functionality from our MSI. Oftentimes there is a web portal that serves multiple functions, service catalog, performance management, analytics. So that's kind of the basic functionality we'll be looking at from facilitated by the MSI. Obviously, tower service providers will have to be able to plug into or provide inputs into that, as well as take outputs from it. Then lastly, critical to making all of it work is asset management. The things that underpin the stuff that our end users, the Commonwealth, consumes has to be managed and maintained to some level of accuracy, able to slice and dice so that we can render out appropriate performance, consumption, and billing. And as you see over on the right-hand side there, tower service suppliers, largely focused on execution. There's a number, 3 or 4 different sub-bullets at the very bottom. We understand that every tower service provider has some element of finance, accounting, human resources, procurement activities in order to make their services run. So that's an expected element within the tower service providers. At the end of the day, we're looking to get services, not just products and tools. We want services. The one item I will qualify is on the very top of that day-to-day operations, you see an applications bullet there. VITA is not yet in the space of owning applications. Those are owned by our customer agencies. To the extent that there might be an opportunity to assist our agencies with application support, that may be there, but that's not what we're going to market for in either MSI or tower service providers. I wanted to make that clear. This is just conceptually what we see between a multi-MSI and tower service provider. So let's jump in then on cross-functional and service desk. These are the service areas as we know them today. I think they're industry-wide, understood. Cross-functional is typically underpinned by ITIL. I said earlier that that will be the common language used by the entire platform, including VITA and its agencies, so that we all speak to the same language with one another. In addition, the importance of the service desk itself, too, in supporting those some of those key ITIL processes. For reference, in the contract today with Northrop Grumman, both of those areas are represented under those elements of the CIA, Appendix 1 and Appendix 4 to the Statement of Works. Server and storage services. So we have, notwithstanding Unisys and IBM Mainframe, we have a large number of our server and storage services delivered from this facility. Some of our disaster recovery capability is from the Southwest facility. So we are disclosing with you in our current environmental documentation. If you've been looking at the prior RFPs, it will carry forward to these RFPs. Everything that we know to be true or representative about our current environment. Just recently updated the second sub-bullet there to the second major bullet. We currently still have today about 30% of our servers residing in remote sites outside of the data closet behind me. So we want to make sure that you are aware that if you're going to bid on server and storage services, those need to be accounted for. The services then under server and storage are largely within Appendix 7 of the CIA, Mainframe and server services. I am telling you once again, IBM Mainframe is part of a competitive procurement right now, and Unisys is on target to be retired. So it's our intention to stop consuming Unisys services, Mainframe services. Rather than speaking to security services, I'm going to ask Mike Watson, who is the Commonwealth Information Security Officer, to come up and speak to a little bit of the context for security services. That is the thrust of this particular information session. So with that, Mike, I think.
A little closer. No? All right. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. For those of you who I have not met, my name is Michael Watson. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for the Commonwealth. And Perry said, "Hey, come talk about the security stuff because it's complicated." To kind of give a general overview of what we're looking for, I want to kind of go back to what Perry said earlier. We're not looking to procure products, we're looking to procure services. And that obviously gets fairly complicated in the security space, right? We traditionally think about firewalls and IDSs and IPSs and all those wonderful devices with lots of different technology out there kind of inserted into the environment. So, you know, the one thing, if there's nothing else that you take away, we're looking for some sort of security services that tie into all of the different towers that are out there, right? You saw the tower list that existed before. That list should, you know, give you some general idea about the types of services that we've got. Plus, we additionally have the list of services that we have been provided out on the existing CIA. You're welcome to go look. It's a public document out on the VITA website. But one of the things that we're looking for is, as it's going to be broken up, we also, throughout all towers, there are some core service functions that exist that are part of a general managed security service that are out there. Most of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the general services provided. We're looking for some sort of monitoring and integration of tools across the environment, some way to pull all the information together, make sure we understand the threats and stuff that are going on out there. Looking for, you know, like I said, the types of security controls for each services that are provided. So that can be the range of anything. Of course, you know, we'll have specifics within the RFP, but we're looking for the types of security controls to make sure that each tower is protected and a way to view and address issues, risks, items that are derived from all of the different monitoring and tools and controls that we've got throughout the environment. I think the most complicated part of this is trying to figure out who's responsible for what and how they all integrate together. We recognize it's complex. We're trying to do everything we can to be clear about it, but from a supplier perspective, it's part of the key thing there is to make sure that we're integrating and pulling it all together. You know, there will be a component talking about CIA. We have everything from incident response to the typical security operations center requirements included in there. We're expecting to continue those types of services. So, you know, again, going back to the concept of services versus tools, so keep that in mind. And then, again, I can't stress enough, take a look at the CIA for existing services that are out there. It is tough to go within too many details without going into, you know, specifics about the RFP itself. But like I said, I mean, making sure to understand we're pulling all of that. We're pulling every tower will be touched by security. Not unusual, not a surprise. And we're looking for a mechanism to pull all that information together, coordinate, and have a body overseeing it. It's a little bit different than MSI, right? Some of the MSI suppliers don't have the type of expertise to deal with things like managed security services. It's a little bit different than a tower by itself, as you're touching all the other services. So it's kind of this anomaly that's a little bit out there on the side. So, you know, we're looking forward to hearing any types of proposals that come in. And of course, I don't know, would do questions now, or do you want to do? Okay, we'll hold questions to the end, but I'll be available to answer any specific questions about what we're looking for on there.
Thanks, Mike. Okay. Some other considerations relative to Wave 2. There were queries before, and these aren't new bullets, but to what extent is the Commonwealth entertaining cloud? And while it says public cloud here, it's all flavors. I think we'd be willing to consider community cloud if you're familiar with that context. But we don't believe, I don't believe, that we can go directly from largely a premise-based server and storage solution right up to the cloud. So that will probably be part of your offerings, and that's fine. Recognize that we are working through our policies relative to cloud, and we would like to be educated on the best consumption of cloud. I don't think it would be in our best interest to have free-range cloud out there in our first iteration. So to that extent, you see there optional services that we fully expect to be part of some or all of your proposals. And we also would appreciate, if you're going to do that, your thoughts on cloud brokerage. The services will not include Mainframe. I just told you that IBM Mainframe is currently in active procurement. Presuming that goes to successful conclusion, we'll have a named IBM Mainframe service provider. Likewise, if it doesn't, we'll figure out how to fold that back in or reprocure. And in all cases, we want to make sure that the services include some form of IT service continuity. So while the classic IT infrastructure consumption featured production and disaster recovery, we fully recognize there might be something in the middle there that talks about a higher availability or better resiliency. So some of the ways that we will go to market will include what's the best use of our dollar relative to insurance policies on a production environment. A little bit about the capabilities. So one of the things I think Chad mentioned very early in his opening comments was we wanted to make sure that we took whatever opportunities we could to set expectations with you all. We recognize that many of you have to go back to corporate and secure dollars to pursue, not knowing whether or not you're going to eventually win. So we wanted to give you at least some guidance so that you can take that back under consideration and make some deliberate choices here as we march towards the September RFP publishing date. We want to make sure that you have reference of similar scope and scale. This may sound like a joke. I don't mean it to be, but we really don't want you to try things out on us. We don't have an appetite for trying things out on a Commonwealth environment that's this large with some critical operations around personal information, identity, tax, a number of critical activities in the Commonwealth. So please take that under consideration. We want to see if you performed in a multi-supplier environment. That could include being a sub, that could include being a prime, and that could include being one among many primes. But we want to understand how you perform in a multi-supplier environment. We want to make sure that it's delivery based. I know you all have large marketing functions within your entities who are really good at generating glossy type, and that's great. I love glossy copy, but at the end of the day, I need to understand how you perform under delivery. Probably one of the most sensitive items right now is transition methodology. Just in case you weren't aware, it was pretty painful here in our first ITO. What was intended to be about a 2.5 year transition into the first generation outsourcing turned out to be about 6 years and still going in some areas. So we want to make sure the transition methodology makes sense, that it's sensitive to us, and that it has some flexibility to it. Whether that's your aspiration to take us out of the data center right up to the cloud in 2 months or some other transition methodology. So I want you to be aware that we are very sensitive to that as part of your proposals. And as always, we all rise and fall with the satisfaction of our customers, so we want to make sure that your approach is customer-centric, and that customer is not just VITA on behalf of the Commonwealth or the administration or the legislature. It is actually our consuming agency entities. Let me talk a little bit about the procurement events before I ask Tim to come up and take over for me here. I've already stated we plan to issue these Wave 2 RFPs in late September. We are currently planning to project awards in July of next year, so the month, about 11 months from now. So that's our current target. We want these procurements to run in parallel, and these are the 2 items that I'm restating from July. Because this is our first iteration as a multi-supplier environment, we want to make sure that folks, that our suppliers and ourselves have some separation of powers, if you will. And so our desire is to make sure that the MSI, who is largely cross-functional, and service desk is separate from server and storage. MSI and server storage will not be the same supplier. Our last bullet then is the MSI and server storage bidders may bid on managed security. So you can do the combinations and perturbations, but that's our desire, is to make sure that MSI and server storage are separate, but MSI or server storage may also bid on security. So some things to take back as you consider planning to respond to RFP. As always, we are facilitating, this entire exercise is going to perform according to the Virginia Public Procurement Act that governs how we go to market. And we are facilitated by VITA Supply Chain Management. You will have, as we always do in our procurements, a single point of contact, a named procurement officer. There will be business sponsorship from within the agency and a number of resources assigned to support the procurement itself. These are the criteria that will appear in the RFP instructions and I just leave them up there for you to read for a moment. At the end of the day, we are pursuing best value. This isn't going for the cheapest. We want to make sure that we meet our needs at a reasonable price. At this point, I'm going to turn over to Tim Rickman with Integra Supplied. He's going to talk about some upcoming features inside the procurement process that I think are worth discussing at this point in time, so you understand what the next 10 months or so would entail. Tim?
Good afternoon. Tim Rickman with Integra Supplied. Strategy, and we're also helping a lot in facilitating some of the procurement events. So you'll see me and some of my colleagues in various events going forward. One of the things I just wanted to point out here. All right. One of the things I wanted to point out, just because I'm not sure it's been said, is we're recording this session and it's going to go on YouTube. So if you, I know a lot of folks are trying to take notes and capture everything, but you'll be able to get that later. I can't promise it'll be the most exciting video on YouTube, but it'll be informational, and I encourage you to make it viral, at least within your organization. So one of the things we like to do as a firm, and always encourage, and is especially important in building a kind of multi-supplier ecosystem, is to work as much as possible collaboratively with the marketplace as we kind of build the RFP and build the solution and all that sort of thing. And so I wanted to talk about a couple of events that we have within the process to support that. The first is clarification sessions. These are events you can picture as being one-on-one with the VITA teams, with the evaluators, which include agency members. You'll see a lot of agency folks involved in our sessions because it's very much an agency-driven model in this round. And those sessions happen typically post an initial evaluation and down select, and then will happen repeatedly throughout the process to better understand your solution, to help refine your understanding of our requirements, and allow you to develop a better fit for the Commonwealth. We think there's, it's very difficult to just pass documents over the wall and get a good solution. It's impossible for us to write every single requirement in a way that we can predict a perfect solution, and so we really want to, get creativity and conversation happening throughout the process. The second kind of event I want to talk about is integration sessions, and this is especially important in building the multi-supplier model. David, do you want to jump back to slide 5 real quick? This is what we affectionately call the chiclet tray, but it shows all the interaction of the suppliers, the delivery providers, and even the customer entities and VITA within the Commonwealth. And so you can see that there's a lot of interaction points. It's pretty complicated. It would be difficult for us to just kind of build this with one individual supplier and then make it all work together. And so jump back up. And so what we're trying to do with the integration sessions to a great extent is to facilitate sessions that may include multiple suppliers to perform a couple of functions. In some ways, you'll see a lot of words in the next couple of slides describing it, but I describe it simply in two different ways. One is it's sort of extended due diligence. It's a little bit more of a focused due diligence to refine your solution and get it right, with a focus on the interface points and the handoffs between suppliers. The second way they're used is in what you might call pre-transition planning. And so there we might be working, and this may also include the incumbent, of course. We're working to align transition milestones, start to build OLAs, start to build some of the service management manual entries and how we measure service levels and things like that. These kinds of sessions are voluntary, and to the extent you find yourself sharing with a supplier who may be an incumbent supplier, we're not going to share anything on your behalf. It'll be things that you're sharing to help refine your own solution. We talk a lot about connecting the dots and between solution and contractual elements. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes, but part of the idea of this is to address the overlaps and gaps between solutions. The integration sessions in particular are a response to a number of challenges that we've seen in these sorts of procurements. Solutions are being developed independently of one another. As you saw in that chiclet tray, there may be many suppliers involved, and we need to make sure things fit well together. They also help to increase the knowledge of the environment, particularly as you're performing due diligence and that sort of thing. They help us better understand your own capabilities and how you're going to work with other suppliers. And so, so we think it's a real valuable step in the process, and suppliers have been through it, are always complimentary of it, and glad to have done it. One key point, and this is true for all the events that we would have, the Commonwealth tends to drive an agenda of some sort, so that things are structured and consistent between providers. We want to treat everyone equally and fairly, and so we'll always do that. We will tend to introduce topics. If it's an integration session, we may encourage a supplier to, if you want to talk about a certain aspect of your solution to see how it might fit with another supplier. We will reference RFP requirements and that sort of thing. What we won't do is kind of arbitrate solutions. We won't provide like direct coaching on, oh, this is the right solution or that's the wrong solution, but we'll ask questions to make sure we understand it. We're really trying to encourage, your creativity in developing it. We certainly will not share any details of your proposals with anybody else. That is, it's always strictly confidential. Anything that's shared would be things that you might share yourself. Finally, we talked about connecting the dots. I mean, really when we talk about that, we're saying that there are a whole bunch of elements within a contract. If each provider were being developed in its own contract binder and not aware of any other contracts out there, we'd have a bit of a problem. So there's these different dots, the statements of work, the service management manual, the service levels, and that sort of thing. What we want to do is kind of get all of this stuff aligned, but do it earlier in the process. We don't want to do it after the contract is signed and then start to learn a bunch of issues like that. So what we do is throughout the process, even as we're framing the requirements and evaluating initial solutions and having clarification sessions and other events, we'll be working to align things and to connect the dots. There are several ways in which they are. They are in terms of the documents directly, as we refine the scope in the supplier solutions, as we refine and build OLAs and the transition plan to make sure things are appropriately sequenced. There are other aspects of the contract that processes need to be similar, so that they work in a consistent way, or from a central VITA management perspective and an MSI perspective. And then sort of by inference, what we really mean there is there are a lot of definitions in the contract that we try to keep consistent, so which affects how we operate with one another. And I think my final slide will kind of clarify that, right? We put this slide up partly to give you, you're not intended to kind of read and understand all of this stuff. It's a bit of a sample. It's a structure of how we tend to build the RFP and the agreements. Part of the point is that there will be 5, and I want to provide it also as a little bit of an orientation as to what's to come. We have 5 core exhibits that tend to be common across providers. We always say that there's really 5 key elements in a contract, and really it starts with 3. Any contract, if you're building a house or something like that, you want to know the scope of services, the quality level, and the price. And so those are kind of the first 3. But then in a long-term managed services relationship, we need to talk about governance and change, and that's really important. And then 5th is human resources and how we handle personnel. And so that gives us our 5. But at the top level, we like to keep things consistent, so we're all speaking the same language. And so that, in basic form is things like the definitions we use, the service level methodology, how we do reporting and when, severity levels. It would be silly if each provider brought to the table their own definitions of a Sev 2, because then if we're dealing with an issue that VITA calls a Sev 2, then we're all dealing with it differently. So you'll see those standard documents that we try and keep common across the contracts, and then within each tower, again, you can't read it, and they're samples anyway, but within each tower, whether it's the MSI or a server provider or a security provider, will have its own unique documents, of course, its own pricing, its own services and service levels and the like. So that's some of what you'll see, and that's some of the way we try and connect the dots is in terms of those common documents. All right, I think with that, I hand back to you.
All right, so we're coming in at about 40 minutes at the moment. I'm going to bring us to a conclusion, and then I'm going to help facilitate a little bit of Q&A if there are questions. First of all, we want to make sure that in the brief description of the process, particularly for you all, it's our opportunity to understand each other better. We want this nominally 10-month exercise to be one of exchange of information more than just via paper, but we are going to be grading, evaluating based on the whole substance, particularly whatever is written down on paper. We want to make sure you understand our requirements to the extent that we do our best to provide those requirements and needs. What we're soliciting, provide you an opportunity. So there will be a pre-bid conference shortly after the RFPs are released. An opportunity for you all to ask us questions about what we posted. We want to make sure that we remove ambiguity and risk, both in solutions that you're presenting as well as how your solutions will perform amongst others. You will be part of an integrated services platform. So we want to make sure that there isn't a bunch of this, but largely a bunch of this. Okay? And then I did mention some strong sensitivity to the transition. We are still suffering from some scars of not too long ago relative to transition, and we want to make sure that we incorporate lessons learned. And likewise, we want you to be able to remove risk and assumptions and to come with better and final offers that make sense both to you and to us. By way of mechanics, I'm going to ask to make sure that those participating on the phone account for the fact that you may be dialed in by phone as well as have your mics turned on or your speakers turned on your PCs. So just be mindful of that. You're going to create feedback if you decide to unmute the lines. For those in the room, when you ask your questions, I will do my best or make sure that one of us repeats the question for the benefit of everyone participating on the webinar. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and open up for questions. For those online, if you have a question, I invite you to use the raise your hand feature, or if you want to chat and pose the question to our operator, David, he will relay the question and I'll try to provide an answer or take it away for homework. Any questions online? Well, with that, we have covered, I believe, all our intended content. I appreciate you guys making the effort to come in and be here in person. Oh, we do have a question. Yes. Okay, so Mike's going to come up and field that one, but as he's coming up, the question is around what is the interaction or relationship between the contract that may be awarded at the end of this RFP as opposed to other contracts currently held or driven by the Chief Information Security Officer.
Okay, so there are two very different types of contracts. For those of you who aren't familiar with the service that was being asked about, within this budget year, the governor's budget included a request for VITA to provide centralized services to some of the different agencies out there. Those services are in two veins. It's the security audit services as well as the information security officer governance services. These services are very much focused on the IT sourcing, the infrastructure contract that we've got in place. It does not include that level of, it doesn't include that type of contract. So if you have a specific question one way or another about where it falls, I'd be happy to try to answer that as much as I can. But in general, think more governance stuff is in the centralized services, and the more technical stuff tends to be in the infrastructure services. Is that okay back there? I'm getting the sure what kind of response. Yeah, and of course the agency applications. The agency services, of course, are with the agency. So.
Okay, so to repeat from online, the question is, does VITA intend to make multiple awards relative to IaaS or cloud generally? Multiple cloud providers. We anticipate that some of you may actually, as part of your server and storage solutions, bring to us multiple cloud solutions, public and or private. Sorry, public, private, or community rather. So that's one mechanism to do it. We may at some point entertain multiple cloud providers simultaneously, but that's not our initial guiding principle. We have to account for the servers and storage that we have where they are today. So it's not our intent to say we have to put on our service catalog 5, 6, a dozen cloud providers, public, private, or otherwise. If we can access it, that's great, but it's not the direct objective. One follow-up question, sorry.
Question about physical connectivity to that possible cloud may not be here or something. You mentioned that wave 3 includes voice and data, but is there scope wide enough on this so that you can include the network connectivity? You wouldn't be hamstrung by service delivery at current content.
So, very good question. I'll give you a partial answer. So, just for the benefit of those online, the question had to do with, given that potential solutions might entail services from elsewhere than this data center for Southwest, will there be sufficient scope in the RFPs to consider other network solutions so that we're not reliant on the incumbent? To the extent that your solutions would require consideration of connectivity elsewhere, I think that's fair to propose. Identify it as a dependency, put it up for our consideration. I will say that we do have under contract a number in supply chain management, a number of network and voice and data solutions that may be able to supplement that space. So we're prepared to try to figure out how to make that work.
Okay, so the question was, do we require that the managed security service be U.S. personnel or any of the services, I guess, yeah, be on U.S. soil as well as be a U.S. citizen? I'll answer in the frame of our current set of requirements, and I'll leave it as to we are open to lots of different options depending on the scenario. But currently, we do require those doing administration to be U.S. citizens or have a green card of some sort, as well as to pass a specific set of background checks. I anticipate that we will continue to do something similar in the future, but like I said, we're always open for conversation and like to hear what folks have to say. As for U.S. soil, in general, that's a guiding principle. However, it is not necessarily, again, something that we absolutely have to do. It is a difficult thing to overcome if you're trying to go outside U.S. soil for hosting data, but it is something that can be done with the right types of security controls in place. So just keep that in mind and recognize that those types of solutions will have a significant number of questions associated with them. Yeah. And will data protection be a requirement? Data protection is built into our security standards. So I can say data protection will be a requirement for any supplier. The question was, will background checks be provided by the provider coming to the table, or will be done by the Commonwealth? I believe that is up for discussion. So I'll leave it at that. Okay, so I'll summarize, and you can correct me if I miss it. The question is, how are we going to handle the procurement of tools for the future as well? I'll probably insert a little bit as well as for the immediate award of the contract. And what was the second half of that? And will the new services vendor be responsible for source collection? So I'll try to answer this, and then hopefully you can catch me if I'm not doing a good enough job. Because we're not interested necessarily in the tools themselves, we're interested in the services. And we recognize that there are a lot of different ways to integrate and pull data from tools together. There are vendors out there that's their whole job, is to pull together different security tool information into a single point of monitoring. We're not necessarily putting a requirement one way or another of exactly you must have this specific tool set at the table. We do require functionality, right? And you can imagine the types of functionality that are generally standard out there. It's pretty safe to say that there will need to be firewalls somewhere because at least it's covered in our current contract, if nothing else. We're going to require something that does firewalls, right? Pretty straightforward. What that type of technology and tool is that does that management is up to the vendor to come to the table with. We're open and interested in ideas. and we want to hear what you guys want to propose to us in the approach that you want to take with it.
I think so. So the question was, from an administration standpoint, will all awards and contract administration activities occur from a single location, presumably in Chester, or from multiple locations? I think that has probably more to do with how VITA chooses to operate. Couldn't tell you where VITA will be living if your proposals don't include the use of this building. But we are working towards being where most of our customers are, which would be downtown in Richmond. So central contract administration and the integrated services platform management would probably happen from downtown, unless someone is gracious enough to offer office space here. Other questions?
Okay, so the question is, will there be flow data, or I'm going to guess some other metrics associated with the requirements, the technology requirements that are out there. There will be a technology requirements document, I believe, that will explain some level of detail about what it is that we're okay. It is a little bit difficult for us to obviously put prescriptive information there for those things that will be consumed tomorrow. We will give the details, I guess, from the current operating environment, and you can probably extrapolate from there. Also, you know, as you guys saw the map of Virginia up front, there's a lot of different connection points, and there's a lot of data that's flying around out there. Plan accordingly, and I'm sure during the integration and question sessions, there will be opportunities to get those specifics. Most of the time, we find that that's adjusting, you know, instead of the semi-beefed up version, you get the super beefed up version is generally where that delta ends up being, and the amount of effort is relatively similar between them. But there will be an opportunity to scope the hardware and technology size accordingly based on the information we provide, plus the integration and question and answer session. So with the time frame, the question was, with the time frame being in 2018, how are we going to continue to provide innovative solutions? And I'll say that currently we have a provider that provides us information security services as part of our existing contract. They, I believe, don't plan to stop anytime soon, and we will continue to provide services, you know, going forward. So we're not necessarily worried about filling the gap at this point. We have a provider available. So the question is, will we be leveraging NIST, NIST, or Assist Labs, or other, I'll say, vendor documentation, best practice information when we're making our decisions? I'll say that as we put together, first of all, our Commonwealth standards are based on the NIST requirements. If you're not familiar with the Commonwealth security standards out there, any supplier that will be bidding will have to meet them because it's a Commonwealth requirement. It's out there already. You can go out on VITA's website and see what's out there. But in addition to that, you know, we're of course always taking into account best practice from anywhere and everywhere, whether that's vendor documentation, federal documentation, or just the experiences that we've had for the life of this program or that agencies have had. So it's coming from anywhere and everywhere where we're pulling information from. But yes, we are taking into account as much as possible.
Yes, confirming that we are planning to release all 3 RFPs at the end of September. Any other questions from here in the room? Okay. Thank you once again for coming. The information is recorded. We'll conclude recording here shortly, and after it's been processed, we'll post it and communicate back to all the folks who registered. Thank you once again, and looking forward to your responses to our RFPs.